A study from the University of New Mexico says that most humans have a teaspoon-sized amount of microplastics in their brain. Studies also have shown that the amount of microplastics found in humans has been rapidly increasing. Professor Pierre Herkes of ASU School of Molecular Sciences joins us with more. Professor, thanks for being here. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
So, we've heard about microplastics. Can you describe what they are?
Microplastics are small fragments of plastics, typically smaller than 5 millimeters in size, which is about an eighth of an inch, and it can go all down to basically the nano range. Typically they form when plastic just degrades over time. They can have all kinds of shapes, and there can also be fibers. Some of our clothing would be microplastics, and so they can have a variety of shapes, a variety of sizes.
Is this something that has been around for a lot longer than we've known about, a lot longer than scientists have had the capacity to study?
Yes, probably. I mean, probably ever since we started making plastics, these microplastics were around. But there are some challenges in studying them. One is what we commonly call microplastics. It's larger than a micron, and so we actually can see them with an optical microscope. So we can visually see them, we can count them, and they are relatively easy to chemically analyze. Once they get smaller than 1 micron, which is about 1/50th of the thickness of your hair, those, because there's no reason why they would stop at that other size, so they go smaller and smaller as they degrade more in the environment. And these other ones, we actually cannot easily see them, we cannot easily measure them, and only recently were we able to have methods to determine the quantity. And that's, for instance, new thing and a scary thing with the New Mexico study, where they actually had these Bose approaches. So they were actually able to look at the whole range of both micro and nanoplastics out there.
So without getting into the study, I don't want to ask you one question related to it. 1 teaspoon, that sounds like quite a bit. Does that number possibly ring true to you? Not having done the study yourself, I understand.
Yeah, it is really a lot. Some of the, particularly the analytical method that is being used to look at the nanoparticles has some potential for artifacts that they actually even mention in the study. A challenge is for the study to have a negative control, because even on the older brains they looked at, they already had many microplastics. So they didn't have basically a sample of a brain without any plastics that they could really compare to, which is one of the challenges. So it seems a lot, but it's not impossible. They took many precautions in the study.
What are the biggest health concerns potentially of microplastics, and can it help scientists and researchers look back to say there was a trend in this particular illness or sickness, perhaps that itself had been tied as well to microplastics?
Yeah, there's still a lot that we need to learn, but for instance, one of the things is that many plastics have additives to them, like plasticizers. You buy plastic bottles that are BPA-free, means that there are many plastics that have BPA in it. They can have coloring agents in it, they can have sunscreens, they can have metals in it. And with the plastics, and if they accumulate in the body, these chemicals are getting transported in the body, and they can then leach out and have adverse health effects. For some of these additives, there is a very serious concern that they interfere with our hormonal system, which can lead to problems in development, or actually might favor the development of some cancers. But we're still really, really early in understanding everything that can happen there.
Because of their size, because of obviously being micro, they can get into our bloodstream, they can find their way into our brains. They don't need a lot of help in that because of the size?
Yes, so some of these chemicals, normally they wouldn't get to these places in the body if they wouldn't be associated with particles. But we still don't understand much also how the particles move within the body. For instance, typically our brain is relatively well protected there's blood-brain barrier for chemicals to access the brain. And so that's a really scary thing in this study, that we see that the organ that they looked at that had the most microplastics was actually the brain. And then in people with dementia, the amount of microplastics was actually by far the highest. Of course, we don't know if there's a causality there, or if this is just, maybe it's the disease that favors the accumulation of the plastics. But in any case, the study is really, really very scary in that regards, and there are a lot of things that we should be looking at.
So this is an incredibly unscientific question, so prepare yourself for this. So I've lived in Phoenix for most of my life, and many of us have experienced the summer if we have a bottle of water, plastic bottle of water, and the car gets hotter and hotter and hotter. And you may use the plastic bottle of water later, not necessarily realizing. Is even something like that a concern? The idea of the overheating of the plastic bottle, could that in fact bring more microplastics to the fray?
Yeah, it probably is less an issue of microplastics than of the other chemicals. It goes a little bit towards why you shouldn't be microwaving things in a plastic container, because a lot of the additives that are added to plastics, they are not chemically linked very well to the plastic. And so when you make the plastic, when you warm it up or so, you facilitate the diffusion or the movement of these pollutants out of the plastic, like into your water. So it can help move some of these plasticizers in the water.
So we've alluded to this a little bit. We only have a minute or so left, but how can we avoid microplastics? What are the best ways that really are, frankly, quite convenient, that we can just say, all right, I don't really need to use plastic for this, I can use something else?
That would be a first thing, is if you minimize the use of plastics. There is a problem that plastics are everywhere, from water to air. And so a lot of those come from mismanagement of plastic. So don't waste plastic, don't litter plastic, minimize plastic use. And particularly for microplastics and their ingestion, maybe reconsider using plastic cutlery. Or some studies show that if you use plastic cutting boards or so, there's also risk that you actually free more microplastics than any mechanical process with plastic. So the more you don't use plastic, it's probably the better.
Thank you, Professor. Some pretty scary stuff, but thank you so much.
Yeah, sure. You're welcome.